told me that Anne Catherick had been brought back on the 27th of July. He was puzzled by some odd personal changes in her, but assumed they were caused by her mental illness. He then called a nurse to take me to Anne Catherick, who was walking in the gardens. Imagine the shock, Walter, seeing my dead sister walking towards me in that garden. We just ran into each other's arms, unable to say a word. How the nurse stared at us. I think I know how you must have felt, I said. I shall never forget in the churchyard at Limmeridge. But tell me, however did you get Laura out of the asylum? Bribery, Walter. I didn't want to risk a legal battle and all the delay that would involve, so I persuaded the nurse that a terrible mistake had been made, and she would be doing a good thing in helping Anne Catherick escape. And I offered her £400. The plan went smoothly, and by early afternoon the next day, Laura and I were on the train to Cumberland. And Laura? I asked. What actually happened on the day she left Blackwater Park and came to London? Marion sighed. Oh, Walter, it's not at all clear. Poor Laura's mind is so confused now that her memory of events is very unreliable. She can't even remember the date she left Blackwater. All she's been able to tell me is this. The Count met her at the station and said that I was still in London and that he would take her to see me at once. She doesn't remember where the cab went, but it was clearly not to his house in St. John's Wood. She was taken to a house in a narrow street where people came and went, asking her questions she didn't understand. At this point, the Count told her I was now very ill. She was so frightened by this news, she nearly fainted. Someone then gave her a glass of water, which, she said, tasted odd. And after that, she lost consciousness. Poor Laura, I murmured. She woke up, Marion continued, in the asylum, unable to leave, unable to make contact with the outside world. She was called by Anne Catherick's name and found she was wearing clothes with Anne Catherick's name on them. She was told Lady Glyde was dead and buried and that she was Anne Catherick. Anne Catherick, Anne Catherick. Day in, day out, from the 27th of July to the 15th of October, she was made to feel that she was mad. It's hardly surprising her mind is so confused now. And what happened at Limmeridge? I asked. Marion turned her face away. I can't bear to think about it, she said. The worst part was taking Laura into Mr. Fairley's room. He looked straight into Laura's face and said, My niece is buried in Limmeridge churchyard. I don't recognise this woman. Remove her from my house before I call on the law to protect me. Even the servants were doubtful about her identity because she was so much changed and so confused by her experiences. Perhaps people would have been persuaded if we'd stayed longer, but I didn't dare risk it. At any minute the people from the asylum might come looking for us, so I decided to return to London at once and hide. Then, as we were passing the churchyard, Laura insisted on a last look at her mother's grave, and, well, that moment changed our 3 lives. I think God was guiding Laura's footsteps, I said. How well I remember that day, that moment when Laura laid her poor head innocently and trustingly on my shoulder and said, They have tried to make me forget everything, Walter, but I remember Marion, and I remember you. The plot against Laura was now clear. Anne Catherick had been taken into Count Fosco's house as Lady Glyde, and Lady Glyde had taken the dead woman's place in the asylum. It was also clear that the three of us could expect no mercy from Count Fosco and Sir Percival, who between them had gained £30,000 from the plot. They would do everything in their power to prevent their crime being discovered, and would hunt for their victim to separate her from her only friends, Marian and myself. This is why I had chosen a poor and crowded part of London to live in. It is easier to hide in a place where people are always coming and going. Our life quickly took on a regular pattern. Work, watching out for our enemies, and care of Laura, whom we surrounded with a gentle, protective love, helping her slowly but steadily to recover her balance of mind and her self-confidence. Meanwhile, Marian and I began the battle. We studied the statements that Mr. Kyrrell had taken from witnesses, the doctor and the servants and cook in Count Fosco's house. I obtained a copy of Lady Glyde's death certificate, and Marian wrote to Mrs. Mitchelson, who replied saying that she could not remember the exact date of Laura's departure from Blackwater Park. Nor could she remember when the letter announcing Laura's death, which was undated, had arrived from Madame Fosco. I also arranged to visit Mr. Kyrrell to ask for his help. After listening to my long explanation, the lawyer shook his head. "My legal opinion, Mr. Hartright, is that you won't win this case in a court of law. I accept, of course, that the identity of Lady Glyde as a living person is a proved fact to Miss Halcombe and yourself, but there is no evidence. If you could prove that the date on the death certificate was earlier than the date of Lady Glyde's journey to London, then you might have a case." As I left, he gave me a letter that had been delivered to him for Marian, and told me, in answer to my question, that Sir Percival Glyde had returned to London. Outside in the street, I soon noticed two men following me, and realized too late that the Count's spies must have been watching the lawyer's office in the hope that Marian or I would go there. I went home by a very long route and managed to lose them, but it was a warning to me to be more careful. Marian was very worried when I told her about the two men. Then I gave her the letter. She recognized the writing instantly. "It's from Count Fosco." "Dear and admirable woman, do not be afraid. Stay hidden with your gentle companion, and nothing will happen to you. Challenge nothing. Threaten nobody. Do not, I beg you, force me into action. If Mr. Hartright returns to England, do not speak to him. If he crosses my path, he is a lost man. F." "Walter," Marian said, her eyes flashing with anger, "if ever the Count and Sir Percival are at your mercy, and you must spare one of them, don't let it be the Count." "I'll keep this letter to remind me when the time comes," I said. "But tomorrow I will go to Blackwater to try and find out the date of Laura's journey to London. It's the one weak point in their plot." "You mean that perhaps Laura did not leave for London until after the date on the death certificate?" "Exactly. I think she left on the 26th of July. The director of the asylum said she was taken there on the 27th. I doubt if they could have kept her drugged more than one night. We know from Mrs. Mitchelson that Sir Percival left on the same day as Laura. I'll ask everyone in the village if they remember when he left." "And if that fails?" "If that fails, Marian, I'll force a confession from Sir Percival. We have one weapon against him, his secret. Anne Catherick said that if his secret was known, it would ruin him. I intend to find out that secret. The woman in white, though dead in her grave, is still with us and is showing us the way." Chapter 11. The Investigation. The story of my first inquiries in Hampshire is soon told. Not a single person in the village of Blackwater could remember exactly when Sir Percival Glyde had left. Even the gardener at the house could only say it was some time in the last 10 days of July. "So, on to the next plan," I said to Marion back in London, "which is to pursue the secret. I need to talk to Anne Catherick's mother. But first, I must find out something about her from Mrs. Clements, Anne's friend. But how do I find Mrs. Clements?" Marion had the answer to that. "You remember the farm she and Anne stayed at near Limmeridge? We'll write to them. They might know Mrs. Clements' address." We were lucky. The farmer's wife did know the address, and wrote back by return to tell us. It was in London, not far from our rooms, and the next morning I was knocking at the door. Mrs. Clements was anxious to know if I had brought her any news of Anne, and very sad to learn that I had not. However, she was willing to tell me everything she knew. "After leaving Limmeridge, sir," she said, "Anne and I went to live in the north-east of England, and that's when Anne started to suffer from heart disease. She wasn't at all well, but she insisted on travelling to Hampshire because she wanted to speak to Lady Glyde. So we went there, and stayed in a village near Blackwater, not too close, as Anne was so frightened of Sir Percival. Each time Anne went to the lake to try to speak to Lady Glyde, I followed her at a distance, but the long walks made her so exhausted that she became ill again. So finally I went to the lake in her place to meet Lady Glyde. She didn't come that day, but a very fat man came instead with a message from her. The message was that we should return to London immediately, as Sir Percival would certainly find us if we stayed longer. Lady Glyde was going to London herself very soon, and if we sent her our address, she would contact us." "But she didn't, did she?" I said, thinking how cleverly Count Fosco had lied to this kind woman. "No, sir. I found lodgings and sent the address to Lady Glyde, but after 2 weeks we'd still heard nothing. Then, one day, a lady called in a cab. She said she came from Lady Glyde, who was staying at a hotel and wanted to arrange an interview with Anne. I agreed to go with this lady to make the arrangement, leaving Anne alone in our lodgings. But it was a wicked plot, sir. On the way, the lady stopped the cab, saying she just had to collect something from a shop, and would I wait for a few minutes. She never came back, sir. I waited for some time, and then I hurried home and found Anne gone. Just disappeared." I asked Mrs. Clements to describe this lady, and it seemed clear from her description that it was Madame Fosco. So I now knew how the Count had got Anne Catherick to London and separated her from Mrs. Clements. "I never found out what happened to Anne," Mrs. Clements said sadly. "I made inquiries. I even wrote to her mother, but she didn't know anything. I miss poor Anne so much. She was like a daughter to me, you see, sir." "And I'm sure you were a kind mother to her," I said. "A better mother than her own mother." "That wasn't difficult," said Mrs. Clements. "Mrs. Catherick is a hard woman. She seemed to hate the child, and was only too pleased when I offered to bring her up. Then one day she took Anne to Limmeridge to stay with a sister, and after that she kept Anne from me. I didn't see Anne again till she escaped from the asylum, with your help, sir. And then she was always talking about a secret her mother had, which could ruin Sir Percival. But you know, sir, I don't think Anne really knew what this secret was. If she had known, I'm sure she would have told me. I had wondered about that myself, and now I tried to turn the conversation on to Mrs. Catherick. Did you know Mrs. Catherick before Anne was born? Yes, for about 4 months. We were neighbours in Welmingham. Mr. and Mrs. Catherick had just got married, and Mr. Catherick had a job as clerk at Welmingham Church. Before that, Mrs. Catherick had been a servant at a large house. She was a selfish, heartless woman, and treated her poor husband very badly. Before long, there was a lot of talk about her and a young gentleman who was staying at a hotel nearby, and Mr. Catherick told my husband that he'd found expensive presents, gold rings and such like, hidden in his wife's drawer. And who was this gentleman? I asked. You know him, sir. And so did my poor dear Anne. Sir Percival Glyde? My heart began to beat faster. Was I getting close to the secret? That's right. His father had recently died abroad, and Sir Percival had just arrived in the neighbourhood. People thought, you see, that maybe Mrs. Catherick had known Sir Percival before, and had married Mr. Catherick just to save her reputation because of, well, you know. Anyway, one night, Mr. Catherick found his wife whispering with Sir Percival outside the vestry of the church. They had a fight, but Sir Percival beat him, and Mr. Catherick left the village never to return again. And in spite of all the talk in the village, Mrs. Catherick stayed. She said she was innocent, and that no one would drive her away. But most people thought that the money she lived on came from Sir Percival. The secret was here somewhere. But where? That Sir Percival was Anne's father was hardly a secret, since everyone already thought that. No, there was another mystery somewhere. And what did you think, Mrs. Clements? Well, sir, if you worked out time and place, it was obvious that Mr. Catherick wasn't Anne's father. But Anne wasn't at all like Sir Percival, and nor was she like her mother. I wondered about the house where Mrs. Catherick had worked as a servant. Perhaps I would make some inquiries later. You've been very kind, Mrs. Clements, I said, answering all my questions. One last request. Will you tell me Mrs. Catherick's address? I have to find out this secret, and only she can tell me. Mrs. Clements gave me the address, but shook her head. Take care, sir. She's an awful woman. You don't know her as I do. Back at our rooms, I announced my intention to Marion of going to Welmingham. She was very uneasy about the plan. Are you sure it's wise, Walter? Sir Percival is a violent man. I'm more afraid for you and Laura, I said, left alone in London, with the Count as your enemy. We arranged to write to each other every day, and if no letter came from her, I would take the first train back to London. 3 days later, I was standing in Mrs. Catherick's sitting room, face to face with a grey-haired woman dressed in black silk. Her dark eyes looked straight at me with a hard, cold stare. You say you have come to speak to me about my daughter, she said. Please, say what you have to say. Her voice was as hard as the expression in her eyes. She pointed to a chair and looked at me carefully as I sat down. You know, I said, that your daughter is lost. I know that perfectly well. Don't you worry that she might not be just lost, but that she might have met with her death? Yes. Have you come to tell me that she is dead? I have. Why? She asked that extraordinary question without the slightest change in her voice, face, or manner. I might have been talking about the death of a cat in the street. I thought Anne's mother might be interested in knowing if she was alive or dead. Just so, she said. But what is your interest in her? Or in me? Have you no other reason for coming here? Yes, I do, I said. Your daughter's death has caused someone I love to be harmed by a man called Sir Percival Glyde. She did not react at all at the mention of his name. I want to make him confess to his crime. You know certain things about him from the time when your husband was the church clerk. I want you to tell me about them. At last I saw the anger burning in her eyes. What do you know about those events? Everything that Mrs. Clements could tell me. Mrs. Clements is a foolish woman. She bit back her anger, and her lips curled in an unpleasant little smile. Ah, I begin to understand. You want your revenge on Sir Percival Glyde, and you want my help. That's why you've come here. Well, you don't know me. I've spent years getting back my reputation in this village. Now everyone respects me. I won't help you. If you're afraid of Sir Percival, that's quite understandable, I said. He's a powerful man, and comes from a great family. To my amazement, she suddenly burst out laughing. From a great family! Yes, indeed. Especially from his mother's side, she said with disgust. Whatever did she mean by that, I wondered. The secret between you and Sir Percival was not guilty love, I insisted. It was something else that brought you and him to those stolen meetings outside the vestry of the church. As I said the words, vestry of the church, I saw a wave of terror pass across her face. Go, she said, and never come back. Unless, and she gave a slow, cruel smile, unless you bring news of his death. It was now late, and I made my way to the nearest hotel. There was much to think about. Why should mention of the church vestry cause terror? Why the disgust at Sir Percival's family, especially his mother? Was there something unusual about his parents' marriage? Perhaps the local marriage register was kept in the vestry of Welmingham Church. The next day I went to the church. I had been aware of being followed the previous evening, and now I caught sight of the same two men I had seen outside Mr. Kirrell's office in London. It seemed that Sir Percival had expected me to visit Mrs. Catherick, and was now expecting me to visit Welmingham Church. Proof, surely, that my investigation was going in the right direction. I found the church clerk, who fetched his keys and took me to the vestry. It could only be entered from the outside of the church, and the clerk had great difficulty opening the lock, which was very old. Once inside, I asked to see the marriage register. It was kept in a cupboard, which could easily be forced open. Is that a safe enough place to keep the register? I said. Safe enough, the clerk said. A copy is kept by a lawyer in the next village. Mr. Wansborough's office in Knowlesbury. I worked backwards in the register from Sir Percival's year of birth, and there, under September of the previous year, squashed into a small space at the bottom of the page, was the record of the marriage of Sir Felix Glyde and Cecilia Elster of Knowlesbury. Just the usual information, nothing apparently peculiar about Sir Percival's mother. The secret seemed further away than ever. But on to Knowlesbury and Mr. Wansborough's office, a 5-mile walk, but possible to get there and back by the end of the day. It was worth checking the copy of the register, and perhaps the lawyer would know something that might be useful. Chapter 12. The Secret. Sir Percival's spies attacked me on the road to Knowlesbury. One of them came up beside me and bumped into me with his shoulder. I pushed him away hard, and he immediately shouted for help. The other man ran up, and the two of them held me between them. The first man accused me of attacking him, and they said they would take me to the police station in the town. What could I do? I couldn't fight both of them and hope to get away, so I had to go with them. At the police station, the first man accused me of a violent attack, and the second man said he was a witness. I was locked up until the next magistrate's court, which was 3 days away. I could be released on bail, I was told, but how could I, a total stranger in the town, find a responsible person willing to pay money for my temporary freedom? The whole plan was now clear, to get me out of the way for 3 days, while Sir Percival did whatever was necessary to prevent his secret being discovered. At first I was too angry to think clearly. Then I remembered Mr. Dawson, the doctor. I had been to his house on my previous visit to Blackwater, so I knew his address. I wrote him a letter, explaining what had happened and begging for his help, and then asked for a messenger to deliver it. 2 hours later, the good doctor appeared, paid the required money, and I was set free. There was no time to lose. The news of my being free would doubtless reach Sir Percival within hours. I hurried to the lawyer's office, where I asked if I could see the copy of the Welmingham marriage register. Mr. Wansborough was a pleasant man, and agreed to show me the copy. In fact, he was quite amused. No one had asked to see it since his father, now dead, had locked it away in the office more than 20 years before. As I opened the register, my hands trembled. I turned the pages to the year and month. I found the names I remembered just before and just after the marriage of Sir Percival's parents, and between these entries at the bottom of the page, nothing. The marriage of Sir Felix Glyde and Cecilia Elster was not there. I looked again to be sure. No, nothing. Not a doubt about it. Sir Percival must have seen the space in the Welmingham register and written in the marriage himself. I had never once suspected this. He was not Sir Percival Glyde at all. His parents had not been married, so he had no right to the inheritance of Blackwater Park. No right to the rank of baronet, no right even to the name of Glyde. This was his secret, and it was now mine to use against him. The copy of the register would be safe enough in the lawyer's office, but I decided to go back to Welmingham and make a copy of the false record from the church register. It was dark now, and I ran all the way to the church clerk's house. I knocked on his door, but when he appeared, he looked suspicious and confused. "Where are the keys?" he asked. "Have you taken them?" "What keys do you mean?" I said. "I've just this minute arrived from Knowlesbury." "The keys of the vestry," he said. "The keys are gone. Someone's broken in and taken the keys." "Get a light," I said, "and let's go to the vestry. Quick." We ran to the church. On the path, we passed a man who looked at us with frightened eyes. He seemed to be a servant of some kind. We did not stop to question him, but ran on. As we came in sight of the vestry, I saw a high window brilliantly lit from within. There was a strange smell on the night air, a sound of cracking wood, and the light grew brighter and brighter. I ran to the door and put my hand on it. The vestry was on fire. I heard the key working violently in the lock. I heard a man's voice behind the door, raised in terror, screaming for help. "Oh, my God!" said the servant, who had followed us. "It's Sir Percival!" "God help him," said the clerk. "He's damaged the lock." At that moment I forget the man's crimes and see only the horror of his situation. Several people are now running towards the church, and I call to them to help me break down the door. We look desperately for something to use, and at last someone finds a long, heavy piece of wood. By now the flames are shooting up out of the window, and the screams have stopped. We get the wood into position and run at the door with it. Again and again. At last the door crashes down, but a wave of heat hits our faces and drives us back. And in the room we see nothing but a sheet of living fire. The church itself was saved, as the fire engine arrived soon afterwards and managed to put out the fire before it spread. They carried out the body of Sir Percival Glyde and laid it on the wet ground. I looked down on his dead face, and this was how, for the first and last time, I saw him. He must have heard that I was free, and on my way back to Welmingham, so he hurried to the church, stealing the keys and locking himself in to prevent anyone coming in and finding him. All he could do was tear the page out of the register and destroy it. If the false record no longer existed, I could produce no evidence to threaten him with. He must have dropped his lamp by accident, which started the fire. Then, in his urgency to get out, the lock had become damaged and the key unmovable. I could not leave the town. There would be a legal inquiry into the accident the next day, which I had to attend, and in any case I had to report back to the police station in Knowlesbury. I returned to the hotel and wrote to Marion, telling her everything that had happened, and warning her to keep the news from Laura for the moment. With Sir Percival's death, my hopes of establishing Laura's identity had also died, and I could see no way forward at present. The next day, an envelope with my name on was delivered to the hotel. The letter inside was neither dated nor signed, but before I had read the first sentence, I knew who had written it. Mrs. Catherick.
Sir, I thought you were my enemy. Now that he is dead, because of you, I consider you my friend. To thank you for what you have done, I will now tell you the things you wanted to know about my private life. 23 years ago, I was a beautiful young woman, living in Welmingham, married to a fool of a husband. I also knew a gentleman. I shall not call him by his name. Why should I? It was not his own. I was born with expensive tastes. This man gave me expensive presents. Naturally, he wanted something in return. All men do. And what did he want? Just a little thing. The key to the church vestry when my husband's back was turned. I liked my presents, so I got him the key. I watched him in the vestry without his knowing, and saw what he was doing. I did not know then how serious a crime it was. I said I would not tell anyone about the marriage he had added to the register if he told me about his private life. He agreed. Why, you will see in a moment. He said that he only found out that his parents were not married after his mother's death. His father confessed to it and promised to do what he could for his son, but he died, having done nothing. The son came to England and took possession of the property. There was no one to say he could not. In fact, the right person to claim the property was a distant relation, away at sea. However, to borrow money on the property, he needed a certificate of his parents' marriage. This was a problem which brought him to Welmingham. As his parents had mostly lived abroad, and had had no social life in England, who was to say, the priest being dead, that a private marriage had not taken place at Welmingham Church. His plan was to tear out a page from the marriage register in the year before his birth and destroy it. Then he would tell his lawyers in London to get the necessary certificate, innocently referring them to the date on the page that was gone. At least no one could say that his parents were not married. However, when he saw there was a small space at the bottom of the page in the right year, he changed his plan and took the opportunity to write in the marriage himself. It took him some time, though, to practice the handwriting and to mix the right colour of ink so that it looked the same. After my husband caught me talking secretly to him, and after their fight together, I asked my fine gentleman to clear my name and to say there had been nothing between us. But he refused. He wanted everyone to believe something false, so that they would never suspect the truth. He then told me that the punishment for his crime, and anyone who helped him, was life in prison. He frightened me. If I spoke out, I was just as lost as he was. He then agreed to make me a yearly payment if I said nothing and stayed in Welmingham, where he could always find me and where there was no danger of my making friends and talking. This was hard, but I accepted. Many years later, when my daughter was with me at home, I received a letter from him which made me very angry. I lost control of myself and said, in her presence, that I could destroy him if I let out his secret. Then, one day, he came to our house and called her a fool. Immediately she shouted, "Ask for my pardon now, or I'll let out your secret and destroy your life." My own words. He went white. Then he swore at us. It ended, as you know, by his shutting her up in an asylum. I tried to tell him she knew nothing, but he did not believe me. My daughter knew that she had frightened him, and that he was responsible for shutting her up, because he believed she knew his secret. That's why she hated him. But she never, to her dying day, knew what his secret actually was. I will end by saying that you insult me if you think my husband was not my daughter's father. Please do not ask further questions about that. To protect myself, I mention no names in this letter, nor do I sign it.
Chapter 13. The Threat. Mrs. Catherick's extraordinary and shameless letter filled me with disgust. My interest in Sir Percival Glyde's crime was now at an end, but I decided to keep the letter in case it might help me find out who Anne's father really was. Later in the morning, I went to the legal inquiry into Sir Percival's death. I was only asked to say what had happened. I was not asked how I thought the keys had been taken, how the fire had been caused, or why Sir Percival had gone into the vestry. As no one could explain any of these things, the verdict at the end of the